Good evening, everybody. Welcome along, Neil Jewson Smith. Day 4 of 33 years in 31 days. Those of you that are already in and dropping comments in, thank you. Welcome along. A little bit later tonight, see if we get a few more people involved. But the response so far has been very good. Lots of views on Twitter. Which is where I'd expect the bulk of my views to be, but Facebook is picking up a little bit. The YouTube ones are very low, but in fairness, I'm putting them there for posterity more than anything else. But those of you, if anybody's watching on Facebook, welcome. Replay viewers, you are also welcome along. Ivy's dropped in as well. Good evening. Hi. Should be a shorter one tonight, all being well, which is better for you guys. You're not sat around wondering when it's polite to disconnect and not be here. But we're looking at 1993. So first thing of note really for 1993 is that if you remember yesterday when we were discussing the end of 1992, my probationer development profile was all signed up and I was confirmed in appointment in 1992 in December. Where it's all signed up by those people who say, yes, you've successfully completed your probation and you will go on to a full-time career in the police. But there is, at the end of your probation, at the end of the full 2 years, which was February 1993, there is a big celebration that comes about as a part of that. There's a presentation, there's certificates and things, a big buffet and a whole great big thing celebrating the fact that you've joined the police, you've worked really hard for 2 years, you've built your skills and development, and you've really sort of achieved something quite spectacular and something to be proud of. Or I could be lying. Maybe you get one of these. I'll put this full screen in a second, but this is the sum extent of what you got as confirmation in rank as a constable. There was no celebration, not even a certificate, nothing. This is what I got. Have a look at this. There you go. Greater Manchester Police Form 27A, which was a memo form. It's not even a full sheet of A4, not that that'd make any difference. I've even still got the envelope, private and confidential. Signed up by Mr. Castry, who was one of the assistant chief constables at the time. And that is it. All you got was a memo that said, yeah, you've done it. You're now in the rank. And you can see that's actually dated exactly 2 years in. So that's 18th of February 1993. And I joined on the 18th of February 1991, so it's timed perfectly and everything else, but there was absolutely no celebration of it whatsoever. And I would imagine that there's absolutely nothing that they do now, and you think it's quite a milestone achievement, really. You'd sort of think maybe they'd drag all those people from the intake back together and there'd be some sort of celebration of the fact that they'd all got in. Nothing. Bit poor, really, but hey ho. That's the only photograph that I've got to share tonight, actually, because finding photographs and things from 30 years ago is really quite hard. But I found that in my bedroom drawer under a load of socks in the envelope with a load of other bits and pieces of police sort of memorabilia that I've stuffed in there over the years. But yeah, that was it. No fanfare, no trumpets, no party, no celebration. Just an envelope in your in tray that was probably in amongst half a dozen crime reports and a few accident files that said, get on with this, or see me, or, oh, you know, from the DCI. But that was it. Anyway, there we go. Confirmation of appointment. So I was confirmed as a PC and that was it. I've now got 28 years stretching out in front of me. And it was always my plan. My plan was always to do 30 years. Unless circumstances dictated that I couldn't. But when I joined, I planned on doing that length of service. You go in, you commit to 30 years, you do it, you walk away. And God, you know, well, not God willing, but with the blessing of God and everything else, I've got through 30 years safely and without major injuries or trauma and some of the problems that some officers do face on a daily basis. But anyway, There we go. So the next thing that happens in 1993 is one of the key moments in any probationer's or police officer, as I was then, but any key moment in that point in your career is the driving course. You go to the driving school. Our driving school at Greater Manchester was at Openshaw, which was where all the cars were repaired. The garages and workshops were at Openshaw. A couple of other things were at Openshaw. When we got our first ever helicopter, it was based at Openshaw, which was an odd place for it to be because there's houses all round in places. It'd be lifting and landing and stuff, which was a bit of an odd thing, but it was the only place they could put it. Later moved to Barton Airport, which was a much more sensible place for it to be. But in the early days, that's where it was. So yeah, go on your driving course. So the driving course was the big main thing. And this is where I was initially I had driven for the post office for 3 years, where I was really just driving. I'm very local. And then I left the post office. I'd become a special constable, but I left the post office and I went to work for a dispatch company where they gave me my own van, which was mine. I took it home every night. It was great. I never paid for any fuel for anything I did away from work. It was fantastic. But the difference was that I covered John O'Groats to Land's End. That was my area of coverage. I even went to the Isle of Man once, but I had to fly and then catch a taxi and deliver something and then come back and spent the day on the island and then flew home and drove my van back home from Liverpool Airport. But suddenly I was traveling nationally and I was doing an awful lot more miles. Most of the time I was doing sort of 2,000 miles a week. So I was doing a lot of driving. I saw an awful lot on the roads over those years. But driving and cars were always something that I loved, always something that I was interested in, hence the business that I run for myself now and how passionate I am about my own cars, despite what Constable Chaos might say. The driving course was a big thing, and you're introduced to what they call the system of car control, which is all the chapters of the book called Roadcraft, which is the police driving handbook. And we had an instructor, a chap by the name of Don Barr, and there were 3 of us in the car with Don, and he taught us the system of car control. So we're driving around, we're in plain cars, we put little stickers on the back that said police training, magnetic stickers, police driver training, and that was it. We went out and we just drove normal streets and did normal things and learned the system of car control. One of the things I just remembered that I hadn't thought of before, but while I've been talking about it, one of the things we did do is we also had to do a van test. Because you can drive a car, but you also had to do a van test. And they took us up to an industrial estate up in the north of Manchester near Rochdale. And they'd laid out a load of cones in this disused bit of car park on this industrial estate. And you basically had to drive through the cones in a slalom type fashion. Then you came out of the cones and drove into a makeshift garage where cones had been laid out to look like a parking space or garage. So you had to drive into that. Then you had to reverse out of that parking space and into another parking space. Then you had to drive into another parking space. And then you had to reverse out of that parking space and then reverse back slalom through the line of cones. This was caught on the course. This causes mayhem because so many people not used to driving vans and having to use mirrors, and it can be a stumbling block for some people. But they said we did some training and did some practice and all the rest of it. But I'd been driving vans for 3 years at this courier company. Initially, I'd been driving a Vauxhall Astra van, so just a car-derived van. But later, I was driving a long-wheelbase Ford Transit. And I could turn that thing on a sixpence. I was so used to it. So they got us in these vans and said, right, it's your test day. Get out in the van and do it. And I just went, and back down again. And went, you've driven vans before, haven't you? Yeah, just a bit. But you did that and learned the system of car control. And what the driving course brings to you as a probationary constable is freedom. It brings responsibility. It brings you being able to look after a car beat. So you pick up a car beat, which might be 3 or 4 foot beats merged that became a car beat. And it brings that freedom that you can shout up and say the job that you're going to go to and say, I'll go to that. But you can also back up to jobs and support your colleagues at jobs and all the rest of it. A lot of the time when you're a foot patrol, you're hearing it going on, but you're detached from it and not part of it. And if it becomes a big job, you suddenly become part of it because the sergeant says, get Neil and bring him down here and he can do the scene guard or take a statement and you can get back on patrol in the Panda. So you got messed around a bit as a foot patrol officer, but as a Panda driver, you were there and in the thick of it, and it was, amazing. Now, the one thing that the Pandas had at that time, when I started driving, we were driving Ford Escorts, and they were mostly, I think, Mark 1, Mark 2, I think Mark 4 or Mark 5 Ford Escorts, and they had a blue Jambuti stripe down the side. They had nothing else. No flashing headlights, no blue lights, no sirens, no nothing. You didn't blue light to anything in these cars because they didn't have anything. But you just went as quick as you could and as safely as you could. Traffic cars had everything. These had nothing. Occasionally, they would have, and a lot of them, actually thinking about it, a lot of them had a blue light. They had a blue light, but it was sat on top of a white box that lit up. It illuminated and it said police on one side and then it said stop, and it flashed stop in white at the front and stop in red at the back. So if you pulled up behind somebody and wanted them to stop, you could flick a switch and it would go stop, stop, stop. Alternatively, if you were in front of them or got ahead of them, you could flash the red one saying stop, 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 and the blue light, but nothing else. No two tones, nothing. Which made for some interesting drives when you go into like an emergency incident, a personal attack alarm, something like that. Why are they called Pandas? I don't know. I guess something to do with black and white. But we also know that a lot of the very original police vehicles were like very pale blue with white doors. I know American police cars are black and whites, Panda, black and white, that sort of. But why? I don't know, actually, oddly. And there I am, 30 years in the cops, and don't really know why they were called Panda cars. But I suspect something to do with that. So it brings that freedom. And so I passed my driving course. The one thing of note that for me personally on the driving course was that halfway through the course, they do what they call a check drive. And the check drive is to make sure that you've got a grasp of the skills that they want you to demonstrate for your final drive, and just make sure that you're progressing as you should be. And if you don't pass your check drive, you're off the course. So you've got to pass your check drive. And on the day of our check drive, there'd been some problems with the cars. So we had to take out, and the car that I took out was actually what they called an intermediate car. Get this. An intermediate car. It was a 2-litre Fiat Tempra. I can see you all totally jealous now of the fact that I went out in this Fiat Tempra. A god-awful car. But to be fair, in comparison to some of the other stuff, it was actually reasonably nice compared to some of the Pandas and so on. But the hardest thing for me to deal with there was the fact that my check drive was being overseen by one of the driving school sergeants, and that put me under a bit of pressure. But I went through all my cockpit drill, got everything sorted out, did the drive, quite happy. And the only one thing that he said two things to me throughout the process of the drive of note. One, we were driving along a lane and I'm minding my own business. He said, "Have you seen the cyclist in the red jacket?" And I'm like, "What cyclist in the red jacket?" And I'm looking in my mirrors and I said, "No, I haven't seen one." And he pointed diagonally across the car and said, "You can see that the lane ahead goes right." He said, "And if you look at the cross view across the field, as you're approaching this bend in the road, if you look at the cross view, there's a cyclist on that lane in a red jacket and he's going the same way that we're going." And that just opened my eyes to some of the advanced driving skills where you start expanding your observations out much, much further and way ahead of where you actually are. The second thing that he said to me at the end of the drive, was he said, "That was a good drive. You've got advanced driving material capability if you keep up and keep practicing." So that was a check drive done, finished the course, passed the course, and they would often, if you showed promise as a driver, they would tick and say recommended for advanced car, and I was recommended for advanced car. And that's not something that comes very quickly. That takes time. It's not like, oh, we can do it next week, because I had to go back to division now and drive a Panda and push a Panda around a car beat and start picking up the work. So that was the car course done. One of the jobs probably just before, or maybe I was doubled up and had actually got my car authority at that point. But I was doubled up one day. I was really fit. I was probably the fittest I've ever been in my life at this point. And I played hockey regular as clockwork. Every weekend, if I wasn't working, I was playing hockey. I was often playing Saturday and Sunday. I was training in the week. I was fast on my feet. And we had one job one night. There'd been a bit of a car chase and traffic had been involved and all sorts of stuff. And we were right on top and they'd gone down this dead end and we were right behind with a couple of other cars. And this car gets to the end of this dead end and the doors open and about 4 people just bail out and starburst in every direction. All the cars, lights going and traffic cars, the traffic car lads used to often jump out and leave all the sirens going and run away. So the neighbours would sort of be looking out the curtains and did see a parked car and a load of police cars with the doors open and a siren going, nee, 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 and no cops, nobody there because we'd all run off. But on this night, the car was abandoned. They all starburst. I was in the passenger seat of a Panda with a lad that I worked with for many years called Andy. And I opened the door and was gone. I was off like a flash. It was like Linford Christie. I should have been packing shorts and trainers when I was working because I was quick and I'm 6 foot, but I'm all legs. So I can cover ground really quickly when I'm running. Not anymore, but I could then. And so I was off like a flash behind this lad, and I chased him down for about 250, 300 meters or so. I was chasing him down paths and ginnels and all the rest of it, and eventually grabbed him, got hold of this lad, locked up, thank you very much, start walking him back to the car. But as you'll see, as I've put in the title this week, for today, is that we had confirmed in ranking the end of probation, driving course and freedom, and then also we've got a fat bloke and an old sweat. And this is where the fat bloke bit comes into it, because as PCs at that time, which was an interesting observation that I made on my final day at work just recently before Christmas, is that I went to work on my last day in the proper white shirt and tie and epaulets and everything. I said, I'm starting my career in the uniform. I'm finishing my career in the uniform that I started it in, or how it looked, which was something just personal for me. I didn't have to, but I wanted to, and that was for me. But the one thing that was pointed out, and I remembered, was the fact that actually, at that point, constables and sergeants all wore blue shirts in Greater Manchester. The Merseyside, I think, were white always, but we had blue shirts. When you got to inspector, you went to a white shirt and then all the way up. So we were in blue shirts. And Andy, who I was working with, who'd gone chasing after somebody else in a completely opposite direction. But imagine there's radio messages saying, we're chasing this way, and there's 4 different people being chased by 4 different cops, all trying to give location updates of where they are, the rest of it. And Andy had gone chasing after another one. And he shouts up on the radio, and it'd all sort of gone quiet, and we thought the job was over. And then he shouts up and says, I'm still chasing one. It's a fat bloke in the white shirt. Running all this of it. And it all goes quiet again. And then suddenly the inspector comes on the radio and says, that fat bloke in a white shirt is me. He was chasing the inspector, who thought he was chasing somebody else. But Andy had been chasing after him, shouting, chase the fat one in the white shirt, and it was the inspector. Oops. I don't know whether it did his career any harm, but it was funny at the time. Potentially a cake fine, I guess, these days. But anyway, so we did that. And then the final one, really, just to finish off today, was an old sweat. And that's a phrase that comes up in policing quite a lot. I'm sure it does in other professions, but it comes up quite a lot where people talk about somebody who's been in the job for so long that they're fed up of it, they're miserable and grumpy all the time, and don't want to do anything, and are particularly concerned at talking to you and telling you about the fact that the job's effed, shall we say, and it's not what it used to be. And there was one guy when I was working at Withington, and he worked the front desk at the police station, and did regular days. He'd been in the job, 20 odd years. He was almost ready to go. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he was alcoholic, but he was the grumpiest, most miserable bloke. And his name was Merv. I don't remember anything else about his name at all, but his name was Merv, and everybody called him Merv the Swerve because he swerved jobs. He never went to them or dealt with them. He always swerved dealing with them. And he was on the front counter because it was a fairly easy life. He could get grumpy with the people who came in kicking up a stink and bringing in property and all the rest of it. It was a very basic role on the front desk, just dealing with people who come in and made inquiries. But it could be quite a busy position because we don't have all the online stuff. We didn't have all the online stuff that we have now, and 101 and all that kind of stuff. People often called into the police station for all sorts of things, and sometimes they had to, for things to be signed or checked, or document production and stuff like that would come in all the time. Whereas now officers can check your driving license and your insurance and your MOT status at the side of the road. Don't need to give you a producer. So lots of things going on. But he was the old sweat of the Nick, and just as a hindsight is that I don't ever really feel like I became an old sweat, but you do become very cynical of the job and very critical of where we are now into where we used to be then. And it's almost like an invisible line that you sort of cross over, and you don't realize that you've crossed over into it, but you suddenly find that you've become that sort of, what are we doing that for? Well, that's stupid. And I don't know, it's probably a balance of the two. I don't know. I don't think it's perhaps that you just become completely anti and totally cynical, but I think you've also got a heck of a lot of experience and knowledge of doing a role in a particular way, that when somebody who comes along and says, oh, we're going to do it all differently, and you're like, what do you know? You don't do that. This role, you don't, why have you come in and told us how we're going to do our job when you don't do our job? But there we go. Fat bloke and an old sweat. But the fat bloke joke is one that I've mentioned many times with people, and it's it always raises a snigger with the chasing the fat bloke in the white shirt. But that's about it. 1993 was very much a year of me getting my driving course and getting out there on my own and flying solo, and driving the cars, getting out to the jobs, and dealing with matters in my own way. And you're suddenly not reliant on everybody picking you up, dropping you off, taking you somewhere. And the probationers that are behind me, I'm now picking up and saying, you're going to have to take a statement at this because the sergeant says so. Well, I'll pick you up. Yeah, I'll meet you on such a corner there because you're going to the sudden death that's just come in because the sergeant says so. So things sort of change and move along a bit. But there we go. That's 1993. So that's day 4 of 33 years in policing, 33 years policing in 31 days. So I'll be with you tomorrow for 1994. Just a quick look at the screen here. Got a couple of stories of bits and pieces from 1994. Nothing major in 94, but we're starting to move towards getting very well developed and experienced in the role and looking at where I'm going to take my career. But a couple of stories and anecdotes from 1994 for tomorrow. So it should be another relatively short one, albeit how long have we been going now? I don't know, 29 minutes. I'm still half an hour, aren't I? But that's it. Thank you for dropping in. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you for dropping in, replay viewers, as well. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow for 33 years policing in 31 days for 1994. Have a safe evening, folks. Take care. Good night.